I used to think I had a family, a loving husband, a bright little boy, a life with Sunday pancakes and shared dreams. Until the morning he threw a scalding cup of coffee in my face. Right there. In front of our son. Because I confronted him. About the money he stole from our savings, the money we were setting aside for our child's future. Let me ask you this. How does a woman like me, college-educated, financially responsible, homeowner, mother, end up here? Standing in her kitchen, soaked in coffee and betrayal, with her 8-year-old staring in horror? You think you know the man you married. You think trust, once built, is enough. I thought so too. But it turns out, love doesn't blind you. It numbs you, just enough to not notice when the floor begins to crack under your feet. They say the beginning of love is a kind of blindness, but I remember ours with perfect clarity. He wasn't rich. Not even close. His car was older than both of us put together, his shoes scuffed, and his job back then barely covered rent in that creaky little apartment. But he had this way of making me laugh at the end of even the worst days. The kind of laugh that catches you off guard, spills out before you can stop it, and makes you feel like you're safe. Like you found something rare. He wasn't flashy, but he was steady. Thoughtful. He remembered how I liked my coffee before I'd even told him. When my mom passed, he stayed up with me for 3 nights straight, holding my hand and just breathing with me. Saying nothing, but somehow saying everything. I used to tell my friends, he's not perfect, but he's home. We didn't have much when we started. But we had each other, and this stubborn little dream we kept feeding late at night over takeout, a house, a baby, a future that felt honest. No debt. No drama. Just 2 people trying to build something that would last. When I got pregnant, he cried. Not a big dramatic sob, just this quiet, breathless kind of crying, like he couldn't believe life had trusted him with something so precious. He kissed my belly every night. He built the crib himself, piece by piece, even though the instructions made him swear like a sailor. Our first house wasn't much, a fixer-upper with peeling paint and a porch that creaked like an old man's knees. But we scrubbed every inch of it together. Painted the walls. Hung family photos. Turned it into a place where love didn't just live, it echoed. And then we started saving. It was slow at first. A couple hundred here, a tax return there. But we were disciplined. We called it our 2 Dreams account, one for our son's future college fund, and one for us, someday, when we were old and gray and tired and ready to sit by a lake somewhere and just exhale. I was the one who managed the spreadsheets. The bills. The savings projections. I handled the logistics because I was good at it, organized, precise, always 10 steps ahead. But the passwords. I gave them to him. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. Because that's what trust looked like, right? We're a team, I used to say, laughing, when he'd forget the login and text me from the living room. I never changed a password. Not once. Not even when he stopped asking. There were no secrets in our house. At least, that's what I believed. Looking back now, I try to pinpoint when things started to shift. But at the time, everything still felt like us. We joked about the price of diapers, debated the best kind of stroller. We spent Saturday mornings at the farmer's market and Sunday afternoons with Netflix and takeout and our boy curled up between us. We were ordinary. Happy. At least. I thought we were. I didn't see it then, the slow erosion. How trust doesn't shatter all at once. It flakes away quietly, like old paint in the wind. But if I could go back and talk to that version of me, the one laughing over a grocery budget, sipping wine in pajama pants while checking interest rates, I'd say one thing. Keep the passwords. Because the person who wants access to everything might be the one who's already hiding something. The first crack didn't come with shouting. It came with a receipt. A gas station I didn't recognize. $27 for miscellaneous. I remember thinking maybe he grabbed snacks for the office, or filled up someone else's tank out of kindness. That's who he was, right? Kind. But then there was another one. A fancy coffee shop in Midtown, the kind we never went to because we had a perfectly good Keurig at home. And then a third. A boutique auto repair place I knew he didn't use. When I asked, he waved it off. Oh, the old shop closed down. This one's closer to work. He said it so casually. So convincingly. And I believed him. Because believing felt safer than asking more questions. Then came the late evenings. He used to rush home. Not just because of our son, but because we liked being around each other. We'd cook dinner together, him chopping onions with swimming goggles on, me teasing him for crying anyway. But slowly, those evenings changed. He started working late. At first, it was crunch time at the office. Then it was grabbing drinks with an old college buddy. Then, I just need space to clear my head. It wasn't that I didn't feel it, the distance. It was that I couldn't admit it. Because if I admitted it, what would that mean? I remember the night he came home smelling like a different kind of soap. The kind you only find in hotels or someone else's bathroom. I asked him, trying to keep my voice light, "Did you switch body wash?" He laughed, not his real laugh, but the tight one he used with strangers. "Used whatever was at the gym," he said. "Don't worry, babe." I didn't say anything after that. But I sat in bed for a long time that night, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above us like it was trying to hypnotize me into forgetting. Still, I told myself, "You're overthinking. He's tired. You're tired. Life is busy." I even Googled it, "Can stress make your partner distant?" And there it was, a dozen articles telling me not to jump to conclusions. Telling me to communicate. Telling me to trust. So I did. When he said he needed a weekend trip with the guys, I helped him pack. Folded his shirts. Slipped a note into his sock that said, "Miss you already." When he said he had to transfer some money to pay off an old credit card balance, I nodded. "Just let me know so I can adjust the budget," I said, already opening the spreadsheet. But he never sent me the amount. Never updated the file. And I didn't ask again. I didn't want to become this nagging wife. I didn't want to be the woman who reads too much into things. He was my husband. The father of my child. The man who once held my hand during labor and whispered, "You're doing amazing," even though I was screaming at him 5 seconds earlier. You don't just start suspecting that man of lying. Of hiding. Of cheating. So I didn't. I swallowed the weird feelings. I explained away the inconsistencies. I told myself that every marriage has lulls, that we were just in one. But here's what no one tells you. Sometimes, love makes you blind, yes, but sometimes, it just makes you look the other way. It rewrites the red flags into, maybe it's nothing. It turns your intuition into paranoia. And when your heart is all in, your brain becomes a negotiator for denial. I wish I could say I figured it out then, that I followed the clues like a movie detective and confronted him like some strong, self-assured woman on a Netflix series. But I didn't. I brushed it all off. Every whisper of doubt. Every sinking feeling in my chest. Because the truth is, I didn't want the life we built to be a lie. I needed it to be real. For me. For our son. For the nights we held hands under cheap fairy lights in our backyard and dreamed about growing old. And so I clung to that version of him. The one who built a crib. The one who kissed my forehead after long shifts. The one who once danced with our toddler to the sound of the dishwasher. But the cracks were already spreading. I just hadn't realized yet that everything we'd built was starting to rot from the inside. It was just another Tuesday night. Our son had finally gone to bed after 3 bedtime stories and a promise that I'd check under the bed just one more time. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet you don't question, not because everything is okay, but because you're too tired to find out if it's not. I curled up on the couch with my laptop, a half glass of wine, and a to-do list that included paying the water bill, reviewing our grocery expenses, and making sure the automatic savings transfers had gone through. It was supposed to be a quick check. Just a routine scroll through numbers and dates, a thing I'd done 100 times. But then my heart stopped. $3,000. Gone. Withdrawn. Not transferred. Not pending. Just gone. From our savings. The one labeled Family Future. The one we promised wouldn't be touched unless it was an emergency. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe I'd clicked the wrong tab. Maybe it was from another account. I refreshed the screen. Once. Twice. Still there. Still gone. The name next to the transaction wasn't a company. It was just initials. And a note, personal transfer. I sat there, staring at the screen as the numbers blurred. My mind started doing that thing it does when something terrible is unfolding, running every possible explanation like a Rolodex on fire. Maybe he needed the money for something big. Maybe it really was an emergency. Maybe he'd already told me, and I forgot. But I hadn't forgotten. Because this wasn't the first time. 2 months earlier, I'd noticed another withdrawal. $1,200. He told me it was a credit card penalty. Said he'd missed a payment, stupid mistake, he laughed. Had to clear it fast so we wouldn't get hit with interest. And I believed him. Because that's what love does sometimes. It makes you hand over the benefit of the doubt like a gift you can't afford to keep giving, but do anyway. The second time. $800. Medical bill from my old back injury, he said. The insurance didn't cover it. I remember nodding, even as something in my chest tightened. I remember saying, okay, even though I wanted to ask, why didn't you tell me before pulling from our savings? And now, the third time. $3,000. No warning. No explanation. No text saying, hey babe, we need to talk. Just silence and subtraction. I checked the timestamps. The withdrawal was made on a Thursday. At 2:17 p.m. He told me he was in a meeting then. I remember it because I tried to call him about picking up our son from school, and he sent me straight to voicemail with a can't talk, meeting, text. But apparently, he could talk to the bank. That's when the tremble started. Not in my hands, but in my mind. A kind of internal shaking that makes every memory feel like it's sitting on fault lines. Because once you start to see the cracks, it's impossible not to question the walls. Why $3,000? Why now? Why from that account, the one with our child's name on it, metaphorically and emotionally? I opened our spreadsheet. The one where I track every deposit, every goal, every plan. I scrolled to the tab labeled 2025 Goals. Private school deposit. Summer camp. Emergency medical fund. Retirement cushion. Now it all looked like a lie. My eyes kept going back to that single transaction, like maybe if I stared hard enough, the numbers would reverse. That somehow, intention could undo impact. But the damage was already done. And the worst part? I didn't even feel angry yet. Just numb. Like standing in a room you decorated with love, only to realize the floorboards were hollow and the walls were paper thin. Like realizing the man you trusted with your future might have already started rewriting it, without you. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was something deeper, older, primal. But after staring at the bank statement for nearly an hour, I opened his Venmo history. I'd never checked before. Not because I didn't have access, but because I never thought I needed to. He once joked, "What, you think I'm sending secret money to a mistress?" And I laughed along with him, not because it was funny, but because the idea felt so ridiculous. Until it wasn't. I scrolled. At first, it was just the usual: lunch, gas, split Uber, all months old. But then, a recent payment. Just 2 days ago. $250. To someone named Maddie S. The note, "For you and Lily, yellow heart dot." That emoji. That bright yellow heart. It hit harder than the dollar amount. It wasn't just casual. It was intimate. Familiar. Warm. Lily. I whispered the name out loud like it was a spell I didn't mean to cast. We didn't know any Maddie. We didn't know any Lily. He never mentioned them. Not once. And yet, there they were, quietly written in a transaction he probably thought I'd never see. A man who claimed to be too strapped for cash to chip in for our son's soccer fees, was sending money to another woman and her child. A man who once made me feel guilty for buying organic apples instead of the cheaper ones, was wiring affection and funds to someone I'd never met. The paradox sat like fire in my chest. How do you love someone, and hide entire lives from them? How do you say, "We need to cut back this month," while handing pieces of our future to someone else, as if it's spare change? I sat frozen. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure what to do next. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. I wanted to wake him up and ask, "Who the hell is Maddie? And why does she have our money?" But I didn't. Not that night. Instead, I copied the transaction. Took a screenshot. Saved it in a private folder. Then I logged out, closed the laptop, and sat in silence for a long time. I could hear the tick of the hallway clock. The hum of the refrigerator. The slow, steady breathing of my child in the next room. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about protection. Because suddenly, it wasn't just our savings that felt violated, it was the entire narrative of our life. Our plans. Our promises. The stories we told our son about teamwork and trust and building something together. I looked around our living room, at the framed photo of us on the beach, the bookshelf he built with his own hands, the couch where we'd laughed and cried and fed a baby with half-open eyes. It all looked the same. But it didn't feel the same. It felt staged. Like a set for a life that only I thought was real. And so I did the only thing I could think to do: I watched. I waited. I studied his movements. His words. His excuses. I became the quiet observer of my own marriage. He didn't know. He had no idea. He kissed me goodbye like usual, said, "Love you," on his way out the door. And I said it back. Because love, once, had been true. And maybe I needed to hear the lie from his lips to remind myself of what was slipping through my fingers. But something inside me shifted that night. Not anger. Not yet. Just awareness. A cold, calm kind of clarity. The kind that doesn't shout, it sharpens. Because here's the thing, I wasn't ready to confront him. Not until I was absolutely sure. Not until I had everything. And when I did, I wasn't going to ask him for the truth. I was going to show him I already knew it. It was a Sunday morning. The kind that should have been quiet, soft around the edges, filled with syrupy smiles and the clinking of silverware. Our son was still in his pajamas, humming something under his breath while he pushed blueberries into the shape of a smiley face on his pancake. The air smelled like cinnamon and coffee. It was, on the surface, the picture of a life I had once prayed for. He stood by the stove, flipping the last pancake onto a plate, still in the old college hoodie he always wore on weekends. He smiled at me over his shoulder like nothing was wrong. And for a second, I wanted to let it be. To eat the pancakes. To laugh at some dumb joke. To pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen. But I couldn't. Not anymore. I poured myself a cup of coffee, took a deep breath, and asked, my voice calm, level, almost too gentle for what was coming. Do you think I don't know about the money in the savings account? The words hung in the air like smoke. Thick. Inescapable. He froze, just for a moment, spatula still in hand. Then turned, furrowing his brow like he hadn't heard me right. What? His tone was casual. Dismissive. But I saw the flicker in his eyes. I didn't answer. I just looked at him. That long, steady look women give when they've already decided not to play dumb anymore. He chuckled. Babe, what are you even talking about? You okay? I reached behind me and picked up the printed screenshot I tucked into the cookbook drawer earlier that morning. I slid it across the table like a dealer laying down the final card in a losing hand. $3,000 withdrawn. Venmo payment. Maddie S. For you and Lily Yellowheart. He didn't touch the paper. Didn't even look down at it. He just stared at me, eyes narrowed, chest rising faster now. And then he said it. Are you seriously snooping through my transactions now? Jesus, what is wrong with you? That was his first move, outrage. Not guilt. Not apology. Just pure, undiluted offense. I said nothing. I waited. Let the silence stretch. He took a step closer. You've really gone through my personal stuff. My apps. My history. Still, I didn't answer. Just kept looking at him. Because the more I stayed silent, the more he unraveled. Oh my God, he snapped, laughing bitterly, you're actually keeping tabs on me now. What is this, a police interrogation? I kept my voice steady. I'm just asking why our family savings, our son's savings, is going to a woman I've never met and a child that isn't ours. And that's when the mask cracked. He slammed the spatula onto the counter so hard it made our son flinch at the table. Because I'm tired, okay? He barked. I'm tired of you always monitoring, always budgeting every damn dollar like you're some IRS agent. I can't even breathe without it being a line item. I stepped in front of our son before he could see the look on my face. This wasn't confusion anymore. This wasn't some misunderstanding. This was the beginning of a confession wrapped in rage. You told me the last withdrawal was for your credit card, I said. You said it was an emergency. It was, he snapped. I didn't want to deal with your lecture again, okay? You freak out over everything. I freak out over stolen money. I asked. From our child's future. His voice rose again. You don't get it. You never have. You think you're so perfect, with your damn spreadsheets and your labels and your little categories. Maybe I needed some space. Maybe I needed to feel like something in this house belonged to me. That last sentence cut deep. Belonged to me. As if he was the victim. As if betrayal was a form of self-care. I saw the tears rising in my son's eyes. He didn't understand the words, not all of them, but he understood the tone. The sharp edges. The way his parents weren't looking at him but through each other, like strangers. Still, I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just looked at the man I'd built a life with, and finally saw him clearly. And in that moment, it hit me. The person standing in our kitchen, yelling, accusing, deflecting, wasn't just lying to me anymore. He was defending the lie like it was the only truth left he could hold on to. And that's when everything started to boil. He was pacing now, like a caged animal, hands flailing, voice rising with every sentence. Our son sat frozen, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth, forgotten. The blueberry smiley face on his plate had started to melt into syrup, unnoticed. "You always do this," he snapped. "You twist things. You make me the villain every time I make one mistake." "One mistake?" I said, my voice low, trembling. "This isn't one mistake. This is $3,000. This is secrets. This is another family. Don't you dare," he barked. "Don't stand there acting all righteous when you've been treating me like a damn child for years." "I trusted you," I said, louder now. "I gave you everything. I let you into every part of my life, even the parts that terrified me. And this is what you do." He reached for his coffee then, not even breaking eye contact, wrapped his hand around the mug like it was a reflex, like the heat didn't register through the ceramic. And I said something I didn't even realize had left my mouth until it echoed through the kitchen. "Does Maddie know you used our child's future to play daddy to someone else's?" That was it. That was the line. The match to gasoline. His face twisted, not in guilt, not even in rage. In shame. The kind of shame that burns deeper than anger and has nowhere to go, except out. And then, before I could brace myself, before I even understood what was happening, he threw the coffee. It wasn't a spill. It wasn't an accident. It was a sharp, violent motion, a deliberate arc of liquid heat that struck me across the cheek, neck, and chest. The mug shattered against the floor. Time stopped. I didn't feel the burn at first. I felt the sound, the crash, the gasp, the scream that wasn't mine. It was my son. He had jumped up from the table. His pancake hit the floor. His hands were shaking. His mouth was open but no words came out. Just a sound, raw and wounded and terrified. I stood still. Frozen. Staring at my husband like I didn't recognize him. Because I didn't. The man who kissed my forehead during labor. The man who built our son's crib with his bare hands. Had just hurled scalding coffee into my face like I was nothing. The sting came next. A searing, crawling fire across my skin that made my eyes water, not just from pain, but from heartbreak. My shirt clung to me, damp and hot. The liquid soaked into the neckline and down my arms. It wasn't just coffee. It was humiliation. Burned in. He looked stunned. As if he hadn't expected it to actually land. As if he hadn't thought I'd just stand there and take it. Maybe he expected me to dodge. Maybe he thought I'd scream or cry or beg. But I didn't. I looked at my son. That was the moment. That was the cut that did the damage no doctor could ever stitch shut. The look on his face, wide eyes, trembling lip, confusion, terror, it undid something in me. Because I knew he'd never unsee this. Never unfeel it. No matter how young he was, this moment would write itself into the foundation of his memory like a fracture in stone. I touched my cheek, still dripping. My fingers came back wet and pink. Not bleeding, but burned. And I looked at the man who did it. And I knew, this wasn't just a betrayal. It was a line. A line that had been crossed in full daylight. In front of our child. In the kitchen we built together. on a Sunday morning that was supposed to be about pancakes and cartoons. I had no words left. Just pain. And a silence so thick it drowned everything. I didn't pack a suitcase. I didn't scream, or throw things, or slam the door like in the movies. I just wiped the coffee off my face with a kitchen towel, changed my shirt, and told my son, as calmly as I could, "We're going to Grandma's for a few days." He didn't ask why. He didn't look at his father. He just grabbed his favorite dinosaur, climbed into the back seat, and buckled himself in without a word. It's strange, the things you notice on a drive like that. How the streetlights flicker a little more than usual. How your hands feel foreign on the wheel. How your heart keeps beating like it's trying to remind you, you're still here. You're still alive. My mother didn't ask questions when we arrived. She just opened the door, looked at my face, and stepped aside. She poured tea. Sat with me in silence. Put a blanket over my shoulders like I was a child again. And I let her. Because for the first time in years, I didn't want to be strong. I just wanted to be safe. That night, I slept with one eye open. Not from fear, but from grief. Grief for the life I thought I had. For the man I thought he was. For the version of myself that still believed loyalty would be enough to keep a family together. The text started the next day. "I'm sorry. I lost control. You pushed me. You always push me. You made me feel like nothing. You made me do it. Apology. Then blame." The two-step routine of someone who's not really sorry, just sorry they got caught. He said he wanted to talk. That our son deserved two parents who can figure this out. I didn't respond. Because deep down, I knew, there was no figuring out after this. There was only forward. And then the nightmares started. My son, who used to sleep like a rock, began waking up drenched in sweat. Screaming. Shaking. One night, I found him curled up in the corner of the guest room, arms around his dinosaur, whispering, "Don't let him be mad. Don't let him be mad." The next morning, he handed me a picture he'd drawn. It was of our kitchen. He had drawn me, with red scribbles on my face. And his dad, with black circles where the eyes should have been. He looked up and asked, "Is Daddy still mad at you?" Something in me shattered. Not the part that was angry, or scared, or hurt. But the part that still held out hope. That was the day I called the lawyer. I didn't cry during the consultation. I didn't scream or shake. I just listed facts. Dates. Bank statements. Medical records. A copy of the Venmo transaction. I spoke like someone who had already mourned and buried something they loved. Then I went to the bank. I closed the savings account. All of it, every dollar he hadn't touched. I opened a new one under my name only. And my son's. When the banker asked what I'd like to name the account, I said, "Safe Future." It wasn't much. But it was a start. He kept texting. He tried calls. Voicemails that swung between tears and threats. "You're destroying this family. You're taking my son away from me. I made one mistake. You're not perfect either." But I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have words. But because I was finally choosing silence, not as surrender, but as power. I began writing things down. Not just for the court. But for myself. So I wouldn't forget. So I couldn't be talked out of what I knew. Because gaslighting doesn't work when you write your own story. And this? This was the part of my story where survival turned into something else. Clarity. Not rage. Not revenge. Just the calm, bone-deep knowing that I would never let my son believe love and pain were the same thing. Not under my roof. Not ever again. Starting over at 38 wasn't glamorous. It wasn't Instagram quotes or late-night wine with the girls. It was grocery shopping on a budget tighter than trust. It was waking up at 4 a.m. because nightmares don't follow custody schedules. It was sitting across from a child who watched your world implode and still needed waffles and bedtime stories. I didn't become stronger overnight. I became quieter. Still. Heavy in the chest, but moving anyway. There were mornings I couldn't meet my own eyes in the mirror. There were nights I folded laundry with shaking hands, wondering if my son would grow up with holes inside him I couldn't fill. But I kept going. Because that's what you do when you've already walked through fire. You don't stop. You don't wait for applause. You rebuild, brick by broken brick. The first thing I did was find a therapist. Not for him. For me. Because I needed to say the words out loud. He threw coffee in my face. In front of our son. And hear someone say back. That wasn't your fault. Week by week, I peeled back the layers I had worn like armor for years. People-pleasing. Excusing. Enduring. All the versions of myself I created just to survive that house. And I started learning how to feel again. Not just anger. Not just fear. But stillness. Calm. Enoughness. Then I joined a support group for divorced women. We didn't talk about revenge or hate. We talked about learning to sleep again. About how weird it is to buy just one adult toothbrush. About how it feels to go to a parent-teacher meeting alone and realize, you're the parent now. Period. There were tears. But there was laughter too. Because survival sometimes sounds like a bad joke at 9 p.m. over lukewarm tea, with someone who understands without you having to explain. I went back to the gym, not to lose weight, not to impress anyone. But to remind myself that I had a body that still moved. A body that held pain, yes, but also held me up through all of it. Each squat, each breath, each drop of sweat became a small rebellion. I am still here. I am still mine. And my son. He was watching. More closely than I realized. So I taught him what I was just beginning to learn. How to name his feelings, not fear them. That it's okay to cry. That silence doesn't mean strength. That boundaries are love in action. That love does not look like yelling. Or guilt. Or violence hidden behind apologies. Sometimes, it felt awkward. Sometimes, I got it wrong. But I kept trying. Because I wanted him to grow up with tools I never had. Not just to survive, but to choose better. One night, as I was tucking him in, he wrapped his small arms around my waist and whispered. I don't want anyone to throw coffee at you ever again, Mommy. I froze. It wasn't just the words. It was the way he said it, like he'd been carrying that image around, trying to make sense of it in the only way a child can, through protection. Through love. Through fear. And in that moment, I knew. I had made the right choice. Not just leaving. Not just saving myself. But showing him, we don't stay where we're hurt just because we're scared to leave. That night, as he drifted to sleep, I sat by the door a little longer. Listening to his breathing. Feeling the quiet around us that no longer felt heavy, but safe. I didn't know what the next 5 years would look like. But I knew this. We were no longer surviving a house. We were building a home. I don't hate him. That surprises some people. They expect rage. They expect scorched earth. But the truth is, hate requires energy. Attention. Space in your soul. And I've already given him more than enough of all three. What I feel now isn't hate. It's distance. It's the kind of silence that grows between 2 points that no longer need to connect. I don't forgive what he did. But I no longer carry it. Because some things don't need closure. They just need clean exits. Last weekend, my son and I took a walk through the park. The leaves were just starting to fall, burnt orange, copper red, tumbling gently across the path like little reminders that change can be beautiful, even when it feels like loss. He held my hand. We both held coffee. Yes, coffee. His was warm milk with a splash of cinnamon. Mine, just black, no sugar. We walked in silence for a while. Then he looked up at me and smiled. And I smiled back, not because I was pretending, but because I genuinely meant it. I still drink coffee. But I don't flinch anymore. That memory, the mug, the burn, the betrayal, it lives somewhere in the past. But it doesn't live in me anymore. That moment is a stain I cleaned with my own hands, on a floor I no longer walk in fear of. He is just a spilled drink on old hardwood. A mess I no longer live with. A lesson, not a ghost. And as we walked, laughing about something silly, I found myself thinking about all the women I've met. All the stories I've heard. And all the things we excuse in the name of love. Because that's the cruel part, isn't it? Sometimes what we call commitment is really just fear wrapped in vows. Sometimes what we call strong women are just survivors hiding their bruises in silence. So let me ask you. How many women out there are still calling it love, while quietly bleeding from it? How many are teaching their daughters to accept less, and their sons to confuse control with affection? And what would you do if the next cup of coffee doesn't land on your skin, but on the child you'd give anything to protect? Would you still say, he didn't mean it? Would you still say, she'll change? Or would you finally say, enough? That's not just my question. That's our question. For every one of us who has ever mistaken survival for love. So tell me. If you had to choose between peace and pretending, between truth and tradition, which would you pick? I'd love to hear your answer. In the comments. In your own story. Or even if it's just whispered to yourself. Because your silence doesn't have to be the ending. Sometimes, it's the beginning.